What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. I wanted to make a video where you guys can just take this information, put it straight to use and catch more fish. I think this is gonna be super beneficial because a lot of times, especially in the springtime, getting on a good bite is just taking what you have and applying it to your situation. Rather than just picking your favorite bait, rather than picking a bait that somebody told you works, every single one of these baits has a purpose. And although they all work in the springtime, there are certain situations where they are going to work 10 times better than the next. So that's what we're gonna be talking about here today. I'll show you guys the baits in front of me, and then I'll tell you guys exactly how I go about choosing them as I start fishing in the springtime. So spring, clearly winter is phasing out. Things are starting to warm up, fish are starting to transition, and a lot of times you find fish moving up in the water column, but they're not 100% acclimated. Along with that, we have pre-spawn, then spawn. I choose every single bait based on the weather and the water conditions. It has helped me get on a ton of fish, whether I'm fishing a pond, whether I'm fishing a lake, because let's be honest guys, not everybody's body of water is the same. Although they have similar ecosystems and similarities, they're just not the same. And the guy who might be catching fish this time of year on a square bill, might differentiate from the guy who lives in a different state who's catching fish on a jig. So with that being said, let's talk about the baits and exactly how I go about fishing them. So in front of me here, I have a spinner bait, a chatterbait, a square bill, a lipless crank, a bass jig, and a jerk bait. These baits are some of my favorite baits to fish, and honestly in the springtime, they catch you a lot of fish. You just gotta fish them at the right place at the right time. For the most part, there is no consistency with spring weather. One day it's like 65 degrees, it's nice and sunny and cozy outside, and then the next day you get a little bit of snowfall, you get a frost, something like that's going on, right? There's no consistency and it can get super frustrating. So as I apply these baits, I'm gonna think about what the fish are doing, but then I'm also gonna think about what the weather has caused the fish to do. And then along with that, we're gonna think about the body of water that we're going to. So let's talk about the jerk bait, for example. A jerk bait is always something that I choose to use right when we start approaching spring. So in the wintertime, we find bass to get suspended, and as we move into spring, they start moving up in that water column, but they're not exactly shallow yet. So a lot of times when I'm fishing off the shore, or even on my boat, I start throwing a jerk bait. A jerk bait allows you to cover that water column, get a little bit suspended, but it also allows you to pause your bait so it stays in the strike zone just a little bit longer. A lot of times you're gonna get some lethargic fish. They might be moving up in the water column, but they're not exactly gonna just hunt something down. So as you bring this through the water column, you pop, pause. When it sits there on that pause and floats there, a lot of times you're gonna get that reaction strike on that pause. So a jerk bait is a great bait to go to when the water is still cold, when the conditions are still, fresh, you're just moving on into spring. This is the bait that I'm always going to. Now let's say it's still early in the spring and the jerk bait wasn't cutting it. Maybe they aren't, in that water column like you thought they were. Then the next thing that I'm going to do is think about covering the bottom. I'm gonna pick up a bass jig. A lot of times when you get cold temperatures, these bass shut off and they'll stay tight to cover. If you take a bass jig, you can get in that cover, you can drag it on the ground, you can really stay true to where those bass still might be relating to from the wintertime. Now, things are starting to warm up. These fish are now moving up into the water column. They're getting shallow. They're looking for places to bed and they're active. That is where I get into more of the moving baits. Baits like the lipless crank, baits like the square bill, and the chatterbait, and the spinnerbait. Now, all these baits can be fished in similar scenarios, but they, again, have a purpose to benefit you based on what you are fishing. If I'm fishing a lake or a pond that has a lot of cover, maybe it's got a lot of weeds, maybe it's got a lot of tree branches, logs, and things like that, the first thing I'm going to is a vibrating jig or a chatterbait. Personally, it's hard for me to pull away from this bait right here just because it is one of my favorites. It's one of the more fun baits to fish. But this allows me to just get in that cover. I can bang this thing off of logs. I can run it through brush. I can get it where I need it to go without really having to get hung up. And a lot of times with this bait, you'll be able to pick fish off of cover and they will come right off and they will smack this thing. So for the most part, I can get away with using a chatterbait when the weather's a little crappy. I can get away with using a chatterbait when it is nice out, but that's not always the best option. Now, let's say I'm fishing a pond or a lake that has a lot of rocky cover, right? It's more boulders or rocks or just kind of open cover. I'm gonna cover as much water as I can with one of these baits right here. If I'm trying to get a little more suspended or I'm trying to kind of fish a little bit faster, I'm gonna go to the lipless crank. The lipless crank is very diverse. You can pop it, you can reel it in, you can run it through cover. You can do a lot of things with a lipless crank that you can't necessarily do with a square bill. Now, when I'm relating to a square bill is maybe I'm fishing a little bit shallower, maybe I'm fishing in a mouth of a creek or something like that that's got a lot of rocks, that's got a lot of bait fish, that's got a lot of crayfish in it. I'm gonna pick up something like a square bill. I can get that down in the dirt. You know, I can fish a little bit more shallow, and this is gonna help me pick a lot of fish off. So that's really when I'm resorting to these baits right here. And then lastly, I have the spinner bait. Now, as you guys can see, I have two spinner baits right here in front of me, and there's a reason for that. A lot of people know this spinner bait right here. If you guys can tell, there is one thing about these baits that makes them very different for this time of year, and it's one thing that I recommend you pay attention to. As you guys can see, the blades are different. On this one, we have a willow blade, and on this one, we have a Colorado blade. As you can tell, the Colorado blade is a bit rounder, and the willow blade is pretty narrow and slim. When I am fishing a spinner bait in the springtime, I'm going to relate to mainly fishing the Colorado blade. To make it short and simple, the willow blade is a lot thinner. You can cut water, you can fish it a lot faster. The Colorado blade allows you to slow things down and get a little bit more thump, a little bit more vibration behind the spinner bait. Now, why are these important? I straight up just pick a Colorado blade. The fish aren't as active as they are in the summertime. I want them to notice that bait, and I also want them to be able to get a piece of it. When it's windy, rough water conditions, try out the spinner bait. You can also use the chatterbait in these conditions as well. Very similar presentations, both represent bait fish, just a little bit different. Now, I know that was quick and I went over things, but that's exactly how I do it, guys. That's all that I do is I get up, I fish, I look at the weather, I think about where I'm going. It's just all about how you strategically go about doing what you're doing. So this was a little bit more into detail about how I personally go about fishing these particular baits. The only other thing that I would add that people are probably wondering is, hey, what color should I fish? Just so you guys know, in this video, I did not strategically grab any color bait for any reason. I just grabbed the first one I saw in my tackle box, but let's talk about colors. One of the most popular colors to go to in the springtime, early on in the springtime, is basically crawdad. Red, orange, yellow. The reason that is such a crucial color is because, you know, in the summertime and throughout the seasons, you know, crayfish, they adapt to their surroundings and their color changes to the surroundings. Well, as the season starts, as they phase out of winter, they shed their exoskeleton, and their natural exoskeleton tends to be, you know, orange or pinkish red or yellow. So that's where you get that color from that fish right there. So that is one of the best go-tos to go to early on in the spring. But as that stops working and as that doesn't work anymore, I just play it off the weather, you know? If the water is clear and it's sunny out, stay natural. If it's cloudy out and the water's super murky, throw those darker colors, your blacks, your blues, your purples. Throw those colors that are gonna stand out more in that murky water. When the sun is shining, the water's clear, throw those colors that are natural, those baits that are really gonna give off that flash, that glare, because fish scales are doing that as well. Just stay natural, stay logical, and you guys will really adapt to these and really start catching more fish. Let me know in the comment section down below if videos like this help you out. I know spring is just upon us. I'm just as excited as all of you to get out and catch some more fish. Other than that, do me a favor, if you're new here, smash that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.